Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Anna Genova. I am the chair of the IAIS Governance Working Group, and welcome to the stakeholder event that we're holding, and thank you for joining us and bearing with us while we work through the technological difficulties. The purpose of this public session is to present the work of the Governance Working Group, including one joint project carried out together with the Market Conduct Working Group. Now, moving on to slide 3, you can see the agenda of the session. So we will start with a short introduction of the IAIS and the different types of materials developed by the IAIS to give you a bit of context. Then I will present together with Emma Curtis, chair of the Market Conduct Working Group, the IAIS work to date on the issues paper on insurer culture. And we would be particularly interested in gathering any reactions to this topic, as I'm sure something that culture is a topic that you've all come across in your respective organizations in one way or another. So we'd be very interested in hearing your thoughts and questions. After that, I will present the application paper on the supervision of control functions, which is currently out for public consultation. And so this is more of a background session to highlight the key aspects of it. And then throughout these sessions, to keep the event interactive and to also get stakeholder views from all of you that have dialed in, we will have a couple of polls. And don't worry, the polling will be anonymous and will be only used to create the aggregated information to also help inform our work. As Gregor's noted earlier, feel free to use the Q&A function or the raise hand functions to ask questions, and then we will look to answer these as we go along, either during the polling times or at the end of the respective sessions. And then last but not least, at the end, I will run through the other projects of the Governance Working Group. So at this point, I'll hand over to Gregor from the IAIS Secretariat, who will provide some introductory remarks on the IAIS and material developed by the IAIS, which you can find on slide 5.
Thank you, Anna. So the IAIS is an international standard setting body responsible for developing and assisting in implementation of supervisory and supporting material for the supervision of the insurance sector. And the IAIS develops two categories of material, supervisory and supporting material. So starting with the IAIS supervisory material, this includes the insurance core principles, which apply to the supervision of insurance legal entities, and unless otherwise stated, to insurance groups. And the second type is ConFrame, and ConFrame establishes supervisory standards focusing on the effective group-wide supervision of internationally active insurance groups called IAIGs. Supporting material helps with the practical application of supervisory material, and there are two types of supporting material. Issues papers describe current practices, examples, case studies, identify related issues and challenges, and those papers are descriptive and do not create expectations on how supervisors should implement the IAIS supervisory material. Application papers provide further advice, illustrations, recommendations, or examples of good supervisory practice, how supervisory material may be implemented. And it is worth to highlight that supporting material does not provide new standards. We would also like to mention the principle of proportionality, which underlines ICPs and ConFrame, and we acknowledge that insurers come in different shapes and sizes, and how they are supervised may differ and reflect that. So the IAIS application papers often provide examples of how proportionality could work in practice, and we have done this also in the application paper on supervision of control functions, which will be presented during the session. So with this, I will hand back to Amma and Anna.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Gregor. Welcome, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Emma Curtis, and I'm the chair of the Market Conduct Working Group. So this part of the presentation will focus on the development of the issues paper on insurer culture, And this is a paper which is being developed jointly by the Market Conduct and the Governance Working Groups. So now I'll move to slide 7. Now, conduct and culture were identified in the IAIS strategic plan as one of the key trends in insurance markets and insurance supervision in coming years. Obviously, issues relating to conduct and culture are of increasing importance to both conduct and prudential supervisors. And we can see this particularly in light of rapidly changing financial markets being driven by innovation, as well as shifts in consumer expectations and broader societal challenges. And it's been reinforced as an important theme during the current COVID-19 crisis. So all of this calls for a more integrated approach to assessing both prudential and conduct risks. And it's been recognised that conduct risks can lead to considerable financial soundness concerns for the sector and vice versa. This is a complex topic and it has a very wide-ranging nature. So we've adopted a really sequential approach by the working groups to this work. In the first phase, we'll develop an issues paper with a scope which is limited to exploratory observations on the importance of insurer culture. And the paper will also include relevant examples within the context of the ICPs. And then in the second phase, we plan to advance these observations through further engagement and the possible development of additional IAIS material if we think it's needed. The timeline of the project will be presented later, but I would like to emphasise that all stakeholders will have an opportunity to provide feedback on the draft issues paper as part of public consultation, which will take place later this year. Now I'll hand back to Anna, who will talk more about the objectives and the areas of focus of the issues paper and how the IAIS understands culture.
Thank you, Emma. So this slide 8 focuses on the objectives of the issue paper. Now this paper aims to explore the concept of insurer culture as a key interaction point between managing prudential and conduct risks in the context of the ICPs. The paper will highlight that insurer culture helps provide the supervisor with important insights into the driving forces behind certain decisions and practices within the insurer. And this can help facilitate more timely identification of both prudential and conduct concerns. The paper will also investigate the role of culture in mitigating misconduct and recognition that widespread misconduct may be the result of deeper organizational deficiencies which are caused by bad culture. The paper will focus on selected drivers of culture as highlighted at the ICPs. So the insurer's values, business objectives and strategies, leadership, accountability, communication within the insurer, internal remuneration and performance management structures, which again we all see as quite key drivers in this area. Now, in order to make the paper practical, we'll include examples and case studies of where these cultural drivers can lead to both positive and negative outcomes. And again, looking both from a prudential and a conduct perspective. Now, on slide 9, we sort of look to explore a bit about how and to explain a bit about how the IAIS understand culture. So you can see the definition that we use within the IAIS and the most relevant ICP standards that were taken as the starting point for drafting this issues paper. Now, when drafting the issues paper, we have recognized that corporate culture is composed of at least 2 layers. One is visible and working on a conscious and surface level. The other one is on a much deeper and subliminal level. And as a result, this can be harder to both supervise and identify. It is all worth recognizing that embedding the cultural tone across the insurer goes deeper than the tone at the top set by the board and the senior management, but actually works its way throughout the organization, through the middle management and also the staff level. And the complexity of insurer culture and the different components that it can entail can make it difficult for supervisors to analyze an insurer's culture. That insurers may face. So I'll hand over to Emma at this point for our first poll.
Thanks, Anna. So in order to learn about the stakeholder perspective about the issues related to insurer culture, We've prepared a couple of polling questions on the topic of the paper for today, and Fazana from the Secretariat will present the questions.
Thanks so much, Emma. I hope everyone can hear me. Susanna here from the Secretariat, responsible for looking after the conduct work program at the IAIS. The polling is now open. We've got 2 specific questions for you that you'll see on the screen. Please vote for one answer under each of the questions. The first question relates to which level within an insurer you believe it would be hardest to embed insurer culture. So your choices are board, middle management, or staff. And the second question talks to which of the drivers that Anna mentioned earlier do you think would be most relevant in the context of culture being an intersection point between prudential and conduct risks. And you've got a few options on the screen, and you've got a minute to answer the question. Thank you. Back to you, Emma.
Just to let you know that we seem to have some technical problems with opening the polling, so please bear with us and we should be able to open the polling soon.
Thanks, Grzegorz. So hopefully you have a bit more time to look
Hi, everybody. I think we now have the poll results. And so from the first question, we can see that the most popular choice was staff, followed by middle management, and then board, which I think is expected because you would expect the tone from the top to be appropriate, and then the challenge is to filter the appropriate culture down through the layers. Now I'm going to the second question, and it seems that all the drivers seem to have been selected as being equally important, which is also extremely interesting for us when we're doing this analysis. So thank you very much, everybody, for that feedback. It's very, very useful for us in developing the paper to hear that live feedback. Okay, so I'll move on to the next slide, slide 11. So this slide focuses on why understanding insurer culture is important in insurance supervision. So we think it's important for both insurers and supervisors to understand the key components that make up corporate culture, as these factors can all significantly influence the achievement of various outcomes for insurers and thus policyholders and other stakeholders. Culture and its components directly influence how the insurer manages both prudential and conduct risks, which is why it's important to help supervisors gain a more universal view of vulnerabilities across the insurance industry, which would help them identify and address potential blind spots. Now we have another set of polling questions, and I'll hand back to Fazana to present these two next questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so our final poll on this paper is now open. You'll see there's two more questions for you on the screen. The first one talks to how important you feel culture is when it comes to looking at prudential and conduct risk. And we've got 3 options. The second question is more specific within the context of COVID-19, and we'd like your views on whether you feel culture played an important role for insurers in how they adapted to changing circumstances within COVID-19. So we've got 3 options, and we've got a final option also whether you believe it's too early to draw conclusions on this issue. This is a particular aspect that we would like to consider within the paper. Thank you. You've got about 40 seconds left to choose your answers. The poll is now closed. Thank you. We'll wait for the results to show up.
Hey, everybody. Thanks very much for your polling responses. So we can see that from the first statement there about how important is culture, we can see that just over half, or around actually just over half of the responses are that culture is a critical intersection point in getting a more integrated view of potential and conduct vulnerabilities. So it is critical, and that's what we would expect. In relation to the second question about the role of culture in relation to responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, so it seems that the majority of people think that culture was one of the many factors that helped insurers respond. So interesting that it was not a fundamental factor, but it was one of many. So thanks very much for that. It's very interesting to see that the first question, the responses there do accord with the IAIS view. And on the second question, it's very interesting for us to get that initial response to the effects of the pandemic and responses to the pandemic, because clearly culture is important. So I'll move on to slide 13 now, and this slide sets out the timeline for this work. So the draft issued paper is still under development, albeit it's very well progressed, and our plan is to release it for public consultation around the middle of the year, so towards the end of June, beginning of July. We'll have that consultation open for at least 60 days, and we'll hold a public session to present that draft paper, which we encourage you all to attend. And then after we've considered and resolved comments which we received through the public consultation process, the plan is to then adopt the paper formally in November this year. And when that happens, we should be able to communicate the next steps in terms of any follow-up work, which Anna mentioned earlier. So now moving on to slide 14, we'd like to open up for questions. So please do use the Q&A function to type a question, or you can probably ask a question verbally as well if you raise your hand to request to be unmuted. Thanks, everybody. So I can't see any questions, so I think we'll move on to the next slide and the next part of the presentation. So I'll hand back to Anna. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you, Emma. And if there are no questions, then we will move on to the second part of the session, which is to talk about the application paper on the supervision of control functions, which was released for public consultation on the 25th of January. So on slide 16, you can see some background information related to the project. So this is just on the next slide. Regarding the rationale for the project, the IAIS recognizes that effective control functions are, that in order to have effective control functions, you need to have independence, stature, and also resources in order to ensure that they're able to fulfill their functions appropriately. And the fact that control functions are a key element of risk management and also internal controls, which helps insurers identify and manage risks. Now, work performed by control functions can also assist supervisors in identifying specific areas of concerns or patterns of weaknesses within an insurer. On the other hand, ineffective control functions may weaken an insurer and require heightened supervisory attention. So the objective of this paper is to describe some of the practices related to the supervision of control functions, as described mainly in ICP 8, which is about risk management and control functions, and also the comp frame, as well as ICP 5, which is, relates to the suitability of persons, and ICP 7, which relates to corporate governance. Regarding the input, This paper is mainly based on the results of a survey of IAIS members regarding some of the challenges that they face in supervising control functions and also examples of effective practices that they have come across. The paper also takes into account the outcome of the peer review of corporate and risk governance relative to the standards of ICP 4, 5, 7, and 8, which was published on the IAIS website in June 2020. On slide 17, you can find reference to most of the most relevant ICP standards, including also ICP 8. The ComFrame standards applicable to supervision of internationally active insurance groups are also integrated within these ICP standards. And so just checking that we are on the slide 17 as well for this one. So therefore, the good supervisory practice described in the paper are applicable not only to the supervision of control functions at the insurance legal entity level, but in many cases, they're also relevant at the group control function level, including in the case of IAIGs. So at this point, I'll pause and we'll move over onto a short poll, and I'll pass over to Grzegorz at this point to run it.
So on this slide, you can see one question, and the question is about ensuring effectiveness of control functions, and in case of which control function it may pose a challenge to insurance. So the polling is open now, and please choose one of the options.
Okay, thank you. So it looks like we've got the results from the poll, and thanks for participating. So you've acknowledged that all of the control functions can be difficult to ensure their effectiveness, and this is, I think, something that we agree on with. So within the application paper, this is not an area that we focused at from an insurer perspective. We've looked at it from a supervisory perspective, as it is an application paper, but it's helpful to understand that to see that you also agree in terms of the difficulty of some of the challenges faced. Okay, so if we move on to the next slide, so slide 19, so that covers the structure and the content of the application paper. So the first section describes the role of control functions in a corporate governance framework, including mapping these to the 3 lines of defense, recently updated as the 3-line model, and also description of the control functions, including when business activities are outsourced, which is something that we're seeing more and more of. The second section looks at the independence of control functions, as this is one area that we saw being very important for their effectiveness. Including a number of issues that supervisors could consider in this regard. And the way in which control functions are established and positioned in the internal structure of the insurer may negatively affect their independence. That is why the paper addresses relevant issues such as pressures from the first line which is a common concern, or when the responsibilities assigned to control functions are not clearly defined. The paper also recognises the importance of remuneration of key persons in control functions in order to ensure their independence, and proposes some relevant supervisory practices in this regard. The next part of the paper covers the stature of control functions, which supports their ability to identify issues and bring them to the attention of the board and the relevant committees of the board, as well as the insurer senior management. The paper describes challenges in several areas that have an impact on the stature of control functions and suggests supervisory practices to address these issues. So examples of these are skills and experience of the control functions, the sufficient quantity of resourcing, and also the ability to challenge senior management and to raise awareness of concerns to relevant persons throughout the organizations, as well as, of course, importantly, the board engagement and the reporting by the control functions to the board to ensure that the board has the relevant and appropriate oversight of what the control functions are producing and their work. And Section 5 covers challenges related to the supervision of the internal audit function, such as the combination of the internal audit function with the second line of defence control functions, or the supervisory use of the work of the internal audit function. It's worth highlighting that some challenges specific to particular control functions are covered by different sections across the paper, and this is the only section that focuses on the particular control function. And this is primarily reflecting the outcome of the survey, where IAIS members identified specific challenges relating to the supervision of the audit control function. So we wanted to give it a bit more focus in that separate section, but at the same time, aspects covered in the rest of the paper equally apply to the internal audit section, or internal audit function. So moving on to slide 20, the next section of the paper is devoted to issues related to the combination of control function. And this part of the paper addresses separately the different types of combinations that you can see on the slide. So the combination of the second line of defense control functions, the combination of a control function with an operational function, or a combination of a control function and a senior management function. And Section 7 of the paper talks about challenges related to outsourcing of control functions, and again suggests some supervisory practices to help address some of these challenges. And here you can find some examples of proportionality for small insurers, because this is one area where, again, outsourcing of control functions is something that can appear among small insurers. And then most of the challenges described in the previous paper, previous sections of this application paper, apply to both insurance legal entity and also groups. But in addition, group-wide supervisors may encounter further challenges that are specific to the supervision of group-wide control functions. And the last section of the paper, Section 8, covers these issues. So in particular, the role of control functions where you've got inadequate or inconsistently applied group policies, then specific challenges that relate to the cross-sectoral and international groups as well when looking at the role of control functions. And also this section addresses challenges related to inadequate communication between the group and the legal entities control functions. And last but not least, some of the challenges posed by outsourcing of control functions within the group, in particular when a key person in control function at the group-wide level also performs a control function outsourced to the insurance, outsourced by the insurance legal entity to the head of the group. So we'll pause here for one more poll.
So now you can see on the screen the second question, and the question is about the area that may pose challenges to effectiveness of control functions. And you can see a number of options, which are also described in the application paper, and you can choose one answer. And now on the screen, you can see the results of the polling.
Thanks, Grzegorz, and thanks, everyone. So I think we've got a slight winner, if that's the right word, around the independence of control functions kind of being the most trickiest part to ensure the effectiveness of. But I think also closely followed by combination of control functions and also all of people saying all of the above. So I mean, from our perspective, we would probably err on the side of all of the above, and again based on supervisory experience, but helpful to get your feedback on this as well. And so this was the last poll of our session. So we've got one more slide just to talk a bit about the process and the timeline on and the next steps as well for this work. So currently, as I mentioned, this draft application paper is out for comment and for consultation until the 28th of March. You can respond to the consultation, and we very much encourage you to through the IAIS website, where there's a link to the consultation, and there's also a link to the paper on the slides here. Do please take part. This will help also inform our future work on this paper. After we've received the public comments from the consultation period, we will take time to reflect on those, and the intention is to adopt the final application paper in June this year. And it will then, shortly after it is adopted, it will be published on the IAIS website, and then we will look to hold another public session similar to this in order to discuss any comments and questions, and also talk about how we address the different parts of the feedback that we have received. Now at this point I will stop, and I would open the floor for any questions that you may have.
It seems we have two questions, so I will now ask my colleague to unmute those attendees who raised their hand.
I'm currently giving floor to Jan. Jan, could you please let us know if you would like to go forward with your question? Hello, Jan.
Hi, if this is, I think my question earlier was regarding just the technical issues. I didn't have any questions on the consultation. Thank you, though.
Very much. Thank you very much. Apologies for that. Then let's check Natalia. Natalia, you have floor now if you would like to ask a question.
Hello, everyone. I think I'm in the same case as the previous speaker. My question was only on the technical aspects.
Okay, thank you very much. If anyone else would like to ask the question, Kay. Oh, nice. Kay, you have the floor now.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes, this is Kei Kato of Tokyo Marine. Thank you very much for having this call. I have a question about the control function AP. It talks about a survey and then the AP based on the survey, but it would be helpful to know the extent of the survey, like how many members participated, since the application paper seems focused on specific areas of control functions like internal audit. Will there be other future surveys and then additional kind of APs based on the same ICPs like 4, 5, 7, and 8? So 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So on the first one around how many, so on the kind of the response in the survey, so I'm partially looking to Gregor to refresh my memory, but so the survey went out to all of the IAIS members, and we received, I think, in total about I think nearly 50 responses. So it was well received, partly recognizing that the combination, so partly recognizing that the supervision of control functions is a challenge, and I think there was real interest in providing feedback both on their own challenges and on best practices. And the way that the survey was, kind of what we looked at through the survey was asking around identifying the main areas where they faced challenges, in terms of supervising control functions, and then also examples of how they overcame those challenges. So examples of best practice, and that was information that we used to then draw on and structure the application paper. On your second question, so if I understood it correctly, is your second question around whether we would have separate application papers for each individual control function? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, will you have like further surveys and then produce application papers regarding ICP 4, 5, 7, and 8 based on those surveys? Because the present AP seems focused on a specific area, just like internal audit, and yeah, and doesn't address like the ICPs comprehensively. So the future plans for additional APs and survey.
Okay, thank you. That's clear. So the survey was done to specifically inform this application paper, which was on the supervision of control functions. We have published other papers in the past, both including application papers that relate to other ICPs. So a particular example of that being on the composition of the board, and also on the supervision of the board as well. So those are also available on the IAIS website, and that was also done through the Govemance Working Group. I don't think those were necessarily informed by survey input directly, but all IAIS members would have provided input into the development of the paper as before it would have been before it was published for consultation. So it would have also reflected their experience at that stage. Gregor, I don't know if you want to say something a bit more generally about future application papers and also the future surveys.
Thank you, Anna. So, as you said, at this stage, we do not plan another application paper on control functions. And just to highlight, there is a lot of material about the supervision of control functions in ICPs and ConFrame. And the purpose of this paper was to address some specific challenges that supervisors may struggle with, which might not be explicitly or sufficiently covered in the supervisory material. And we also have one question on the application paper on control functions asked via Q&A. It's a question, what issues are top of mind for supervisors, and what comments would be most useful on the paper during the public consultation. So I know, Anna, whether you would like to take this question.
Good question. So what we've put into the paper reflects the feedback that we've had from the supervisors in terms of the issues that are most on their mind. And so this is why we focused on independence and stature, as to name a few of the examples, and also outsourcing. So the paper reflects, I guess, our view as the IAIS community of where we came across challenges. And so further input, I guess, on throughout the consultation on either anything that we have set out as either challenges or examples of what could be effective supervisory practice, that would be helpful. If you think there are areas that we have potentially missed or you don't agree with how we represented them, that would also be helpful in terms of input. Realistically, probably partially depends also on the experience of and the nature of the person providing input. So supervisors, those who are working in supervisory authorities may provide one angle. Those working in industry may provide a different angle. Others with, say, control function experience, whether in the insurance industry or elsewhere, could give us a different perspective. And also, of course, there are other groups. So all views and reactions welcome, including whether you agree generally with the direction of travel that we're going in and the issues that we've recognized and identified.
We also have one additional question, but it's a question about the issues paper on culture, but hopefully we can still try to address this question. And it was a comment that the issue seems to be subjective, and whether we will use some metrics in this regard. And I know whether Anna or Emma, would you like to somehow address the concerns that the topic itself seems to be quite subjective?
I'm happy to start, and then I'm just checking whether Emma is still, I believe Emma is still online, but I'm happy to start. I can see the point. Culture can kind of come across as subjective, but at the same time, when you know when it's bad, you know it when you see it, and an unhealthy culture is is very dangerous in terms of the way that it works through its way through the organization, and the way it can then impact, again, both conduct and potential outcomes of the insurer. So I agree that there are some elements that could be subjective, but I'd say in terms of there are, when it's bad, is quite, when you have a toxic culture, I think it was fair to say that looking from the outside in, especially, you can see it from a mile away. And this is one of the areas that we're trying to address through the issues paper, is trying to bring out some of the more objective aspects into this work. I don't know, Emma, if you wanted to add something.
Oh, sorry, I missed. Could you repeat the question, please?
So the question was asked using the Q&A function, and it was the issues paper on culture, and about the culture being subjective, and how we would address the nature of this topic being subjective, and whether we would use some kind of metrics in this regard.
Great question, and I would agree with Anna. And then I think to take it a little bit further, it's possible for businesses to have some indicators that they can establish, so that they can try to track some indicators or metrics that might indicate that things are not going down a good path, using some of the areas that we're focused on in the paper. So, for instance, it might be some remuneration practices or some, performance management issues. Just to use a couple of examples, it could be around product metrics, which show that there's little consumer value to particular products. But we don't go into a lot of detail on these issues in the paper because it's very much an issues paper. But I think these are really things for supervisors to start to consider, and for insurers to consider as well, about sort of tracking some of those early indicators of bad culture or that things might be going off the rails.
Thank you, Emma. Gregor, do we have any more questions? Any more coming up?
Let me check the Q&A. No, it doesn't seem so.
Excuse me, there's, I think, one question just posted.
Okay, great.
Thank
Yes, so the question is, will the application paper on control functions address any cultural differences or norms that may exist between jurisdictions?
So good question. So we look at this in the section of where in the section that looks at the supervision of group control functions. One of the points that we recognise is around the fact that when it comes to groups, and in particular large cross-border groups, you may have different aspects that you will need to consider it. We touch on this. This is not an area that we've gone into a lot of detail on, in particular on the cultural aspect. So this is one area where, again, feedback and any thoughts you have on that would be very, very much appreciated. We look at it from the perspective of home-host coordination among supervisors, but we don't go into a lot of detail. So again, any thoughts and the views you have on it, very much appreciated during the consultation process. So, unless there are any other questions, and happy for these to come up as we continue. So just we move on to the very last section, which is to briefly outline the other work of the Governance Working Group. So the two main projects that we're working on, we've talked about during this session, and again, as you know, that they're in different stages of the developments. But on the other project, we wanted to briefly mention them because these two projects, so exploratory work on remuneration issues and also developing a consistent approach to governance-related issues. At this stage, they're both internal projects and will have internal outputs, so within the IAIS. But for transparency, we wanted to make you aware of these projects. So starting with the project on remuneration issues. So this was something that was due to start at the end of last year, but due to the reprioritization for the pandemic, it will be starting in Q3 this year and finalized in the middle of 2022. And the aim of this project on remuneration is to identify outstanding issues for both supervisors and insurers when it comes to remuneration, and analyze the relevant trends and challenges when it comes to remuneration. And in this context, the IAIS will coordinate and work together with other standard setting bodies who may be doing work in this space, and for example, the Financial Stability Board. And the reason for this work is that we're mindful that remuneration is an area that has been touched on across a number of papers that the IAIS have produced, as well as others. So this initial point is doing a stock take, essentially, of looking to understand are there any gaps, and is there anything that the IAIS could helpfully do in this space? The outcome of this project will then first be presented to the IAIS parent committees with a recommendation for next steps. As I mentioned earlier, we do not plan to make this stocktake public, as it is essentially exploratory work, but to the extent that there are next steps or further papers on the back of that, this work will feed into those outputs in the future. And then the second project that we are working on is aimed at ensuring a consistent approach to governance-related issues in IAIS material. So some of you who may have closely followed the Governance Working Group and the roadmap, you may have been aware that we were due to develop an issues paper on insurer adaptability to emerging and emerged risks. However, this work on emerging risks is already being considered through a number of IAIS groups, including the work on fintech and climate change. And these groups and work has developed in the meantime. Furthermore, the full impact of the COVID-19 crisis, which could be relevant for looking at how insurers adapt from a governance perspective, has not yet been fully known. And so for this reason, it was decided to put this project on hold in the meantime. However, what we are looking to do is to ensure that the other work that is being taken forward by the IAIS that does have a governance-related element to kind of how insurers adapt, that this is approached consistently, and so we will be doing, within the Governance Working Group, we will be doing some work to help support that material, and then that will feed, it will feed into the future outputs, which will then be made public to the wider public as and when these products are finalized. So that's all I wanted to say on these. Are there any questions on either of those projects or activities?
So if you want to ask a question, you can use a chat, or you can use the raise hand function.
Okay, so I don't think we have any questions. Is that right, Grzegorz?
Yes, currently we have no questions.
Okay. In which case, we'll call the session to an end. Thank you very much for joining, for your participation. We hope you found it useful, and we look forward to your feedback on the application paper on control functions. Thank you very much.